Hello and welcome to the new decade's first episode of Material Matters with me, Grant Gibson. As regular listeners will know, the idea behind the show is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. However, for this episode, I'm changing the format ever so slightly, and rather than talking about a single material, I should be talking in the plural, so materials and why they matter. And that's because I'm talking to two of the UK's leading product designers. Edward Barber and Jay Osgerby have been working together since they first met at the Royal College in 1992. They officially set up practice 4 years later and have gone on to create a slew of iconic products. Initially working in plywood, the duo have created everything from plastic home accessories for Authentics to a porcelain lamp for Hermes. They've also created installations for the likes of Sony, BMW and the London Design Biennale, and were of course responsible for the design of the Olympic torch in the 2012 Games. In 2007, they were awarded Royal Designers for Industry by the Royal Society of Arts, and in 2013, they received an OBE each for their services to design. Ed, Jay, thank you very much for doing this.
Great introduction, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sounds quite good.
Yeah, you've done all right.
I don't remember any of it.
Well, I hope you can, because we've got an hour of talking about yourselves. Right?
Let's hope so for everybody.
Can we talk a little bit about your name first? When we first met in around 1998, I think you were doing the Soho Brewing Company at the time. You were BOA, Barber Osgerby Associates. Then you were Barber Osgerby, and currently you're now Barber and Osgerby. Is the ampersand important? Does it have any significance?
I actually think it might have gone now.
I think it's gone again.
It's very confusing, and it reflects in a way our trajectory, I suppose, as designers. As we've, we came out of the Royal College having done architecture masters, and that required a team of people quite quickly. I think the idea of the associates was that we imagined at that point that we would become an architecture practice with our names over the door, but recognising the other people.
That sort of paranoia that when you're starting out that you don't want to look too small to a future client. So if you have associates, it might allude to the fact that you're
Did we have any?
Slightly more serious. No,
Can't
not
remember.
at all.
No. But yeah, so you're right. We have got an issue with branding.
But as you said, I think the ampersand's gone again. I mean, it's never really been that important to us. I mean, obviously the Barber and the Osgerby speak for themselves, and I think whatever happens in between or at the end is not so important.
Fair enough. I mean, can we talk a bit about your background? Because it seems to me, if you look at all the press clippings, your lives appeared to start in 1992 when you met at the Royal College on the architecture course, right? Yeah. But obviously you were interested in design and architecture before that. And I wonder if we could discover a little bit about when you became interested in design. I mean, Jay, should we start with you?
Well, okay. So there was life before 92, a little bit, I guess 22 years of it really. Born in 1969. And then I grew up in Oxfordshire. I really enjoyed making things and drawing. I didn't really know that design was an option or a career. I thought that you'd probably be, if you were interested in those things, it would be art, sculpture, or architecture. Really, those would be the things to do. And I sorted out various work experiences for myself as a teenager, which enabled me to get put off most things.
I mean, were your family artistic?
My dad was a chef, and my mum actually has become a kind of art historian. She retrained essentially, but she failed her 11 plus, and I think always felt that she was denied an education. And so as us boys growing up was never really an option not to contemplate sixth form and university. It was like, it was just had to happen. And I'm glad it did. And my mum was always really very much pushing me into the kind of creative world in some capacity. So I knew that would be, I hoped that that's where I'd end up. And actually it turned out that that's actually what I really enjoyed doing. Tinkering around.
You ended up at Ravensbourne.
Yes, I did a foundation at Oxford Poly.
Right.
I went to Ravensbourne and studied furniture and I think they called it furniture and related product design. And then from there, I was going to go to the RCA and do furniture, but I was advised against it by my tutors at Ravensbourne at the time because they didn't think the course was very good. And they suggested I go to Milan and I couldn't afford it. So I decided to do something different and apply to the architecture and interiors course at the Royal College, which fortuitously is where I met this bloke.
Yeah. I mean, Ed, what about you? Because you went to Leeds Poly, I seem to remember.
Yeah, I did. Well, I think the most important part of my education really was to do a foundation course. And that's where I really, because before that, I did do a design A-level, but it didn't really do a lot for me, actually. I think it was when I went to my foundation course, I really understood what design could be. But I was still undecided even then. I was going to wanted to do sculpture at the time. But I think my first sort of realization that design was something that could happen to someone, something that you could pursue was when I first saw people building boats, timber boats, and I just thought, wow, it was really the craftsmanship that got me going.
And where did you see that?
When I was a kid, I used to do quite a bit of sailing, and I think it's when I damaged my little sailing boat, and this guy offered to mend it, and I went to his workshop and I saw all these boats that he was building from scratch, and I thought, wow, this is incredible. And then going back to the foundation, I realized that there were so many different options out there, and I thought that maybe pure fine art or sculpture wasn't quite actually there was a practical application to design that I really enjoyed and kind of thought I might pursue that. But I then went and did interior design at Leeds Poly. I didn't go into furniture. In fact, I've never studied furniture. So that was a bit of a curveball. And then I thought, well, if I'm doing interior design, I want to do architecture because I think, that it's more about building objects. Creating objects. So then that's when I went to the Royal College and met Jay.
So when you first met in 92, was there an immediate realization that you two were bound to work together?
No, I'd say what happened was and in common with lots of people who go to colleges in their first term, I think we were both a little bit disappointed.
Right.
Actually.
Why is that?
I think we were a bit disappointed that we weren't. I think when you get a place at the Royal College, you feel that you're going to get that everything suddenly your life is going to transform. That this is this amazing opportunity I think we both felt that the bar would be set incredibly high, and we would have to work really, really, really hard right from day one. And actually, it was very relaxed. It was somewhat chaotic. It wasn't quite what.
But it was also quite shocking. I mean, the first project we did was to draw classical columns.
Yeah, it was that neoclassicism.
I mean,
period.
when I look back at it certainly wasn't a waste of time, but it wasn't how I'd imagined my first term at the Royal College at all. Mm. And as Jay said, it was very unstructured, and it was kind of a bit uninspiring, honestly. And I spent the previous 3 or 4 months traveling, mainly around Asia. I'd taken hundreds of rolls of film, and I spent probably the first term and a half in the dark rooms just processing my film and printing and stuff, because I was I was disappointed.
I think we were both really looking for a challenge. We were expecting to be really challenged, and we were up for it, both of it, and actually it didn't come through college. It came through external projects, which we found.
So what kind of external projects were you doing? And were you doing those projects together?
Yeah.
Right.
So we started working together, designing a restaurant for, a couple of people who had a site in South Kensington. And so suddenly we were balancing college work, drawing classical columns and things.
Well, it did move on a bit after.
It did move on. It did move on. But we did this kind of balancing of real life projects for real people, and the pressures that came from that with the college, the work that the college was setting us. And actually, I think that was probably the most important part of the education that we have ever had, because we learned to work together. We learned to work in extreme stressful situations, and juggling different things at the same time. So juggling the work of the college, and then having a couple of projects on site when we were in our really early 20s, and we were learning every single day a whole load of new stuff.
But also trying to hide the fact that we had these projects on site, because the tutors were, initially unaware, and when they found out, were incredibly against it, and a couple of them were trying to get us thrown off the course.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We both had exit interviews.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it didn't go down.
So we weren't like
that well.
the glory kids of our generation.
No.
We were very much the kind of script. Just, in fact, flying by the seat of our pants was our catchphrase.
But then you've always had this entrepreneurial streak running through your career in that case.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, yes, I think we're always looking for opportunities, whatever it might be, whether it's a project, whether it's even now working on projects, we're always looking to do something new, something innovative, something, whether it's a new material, whether it's a new way of working, or, there's something, our brains are quite inquisitive. And I think the entrepreneurial aspect is just one of, that just happens to fall into that category of sort of searching.
It's design as well, isn't it? Being entrepreneurial is, creating problems or solving them or seeking change, or, we're also really good as, we're good collaborators. We enjoy working with other people. And that enables us to really push companies and individuals to do things that they hadn't even thought of when they first knocked on our door.
But it was this one of your initial interior schemes that led to the loop table, right?
That's
which,
right.
which became your kind of signature piece, was made of plywood. But it wasn't specifically meant to be made from plywood originally. That wasn't,
we didn't really
the material
know.
wasn't in mind.
No, because it was this period of work where we had just finished at the Royal College, I think, and we started sharing a sort of studio, in inverted commas. It was Ed's flat, really,
In Trellick Tower.
Yeah. And we had lots of architectural model making stuff kicking around. We had Yoo-hoo glue, we had cutting mats, scalpels, and white card from building our kind of the buildings that we showed. And actually, when it came to designing furniture and things for projects, architectural projects we were working on, we used those materials to generate the form. We didn't have computers, we could sketch things, but when it came to making sort of models, we used the white card. And white card lent itself really well to being translated into plywood for production. And it was
also, I think, which is totally true, but we also love the material because, plywood it's a fantastic material actually, because it's a sort of, it's halfway between a plastic and a natural material, because you can mold it, but there are restrictions. So it creates a really interesting language in itself. And also it ages quite nicely, whereas typically plastics, they look their best on day one and then sort of go downhill. Whereas actually plywood, if it's relatively well looked after, ages very nicely.
And also when once we started on that road, there was an awful lot to learn from the masters of plywood and the history of the material itself. And we were very fortunate that really early on in our kind of endeavours, we found Chris McCourt.
Or Windmill Furniture at the time, right?
Well, Windmill Furniture was one of the companies that Chris McCourt owned. It was effectively a shop fitting company and made incredibly high quality cabinetry. And the other one was Iskon, which was the company that was set up in 1935, as far as I remember, by Jack Pritchard.
Jack Pritchard, yeah.
And Jack Pritchard was producing fundamentally plywood furniture for Marcel Breuer, Egon Riss, emigres really that were passing through London on their way to America.
And Gropius was like the creative director, wasn't he, when he was with Breathstone in London?
Yeah, he actually went for the job as at the Royal College as rector.
Yeah,
and didn't get it, and then the US got modernism.
So Chris McCourt was making these unbelievably beautiful classic pieces of early plywood. And we learnt so much from him because he made the first table, the loop table it was called, for this restaurant in South Kensington called the Crescent.
Which was like a low coffee table.
Yeah.
Like an elongated loop, wasn't it?
It was an elongated loop. It was designed very functionally because we wanted to have a top surface that was, serviced as a low table, but we needed an element of storage. And believe it or not, it was for ashtrays, really, back in the day, and a few magazines. So,
those were the 90s.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah. And so anyway, we were so fortunate. We managed to locate Iskon and Chris McCourt, and he produced the first piece, and he was very excited about it, the first prototype. And he said, I think we should put this into production. And that was really the start of us working as furniture designers.
I mean, he actually created a new brand around this product, right? I mean, he created a new company. Iskon Plus was new based on this particular.
I think so. Well, certainly a collection of things, because we did the flight stool as well for the Soho Brewing Company.
Yeah, he did, because he couldn't. Iskon was an existing brand and consisted of all these classic pieces. And he also wanted to then, I suppose that the Loop Table sort of kickstarted an idea for him to then go on and produce more plywood pieces, contemporary pieces. And he couldn't use the name Iskon because that belonged to the old pieces. So he spoke to the Pritchard family, and they agreed that if it was called Iskon Plus, then he could add new pieces with contemporary designers. So yeah, in effect, the Loop Table was that starting point.
And you moved into his studio at one point.
Well, it wasn't his studio, but he owned a series of buildings in Chiswick, and we sort of outgrown Trellick Tower. I mean, it was not a big flat.
Yeah, it was like one room. We outgrew it with the first person we hired.
Yeah, and he said, well, look, I've got a spare studio if you want to move in there. So we spent a couple of years, I think, in Chiswick.
Turnham Green Terrace, Mews.
And it was great. It was amazing because we were so close to, the workshops and working with him and learning so much. It was amazing.
It was good. And we got, we had an idea and it would be prototyped by lunchtime. It's great.
Did you feel stuck in plywood for a while as a result?
Not really stuck. We didn't really feel like we had, I don't even feel like now we finished.
I was going to say, we're not stuck. We're working in plywood, doing stuff in plywood now. Great. I don't think we'll ever feel like we've done it.
We did loads of solid stuff, we did the Portsmouth Cathedral bench for the Portsmouth Cathedral, and the home table. So we did it. It was interesting because Chris would say, for example, with the home table, I seem to remember him saying, "I've got this amazing oak, these incredible planks, and they are 35 mil deep or whatever they were. What should we do?" And so there you go. There's a project just in that conversation, and that's how the home table started. So. It was the kind of education in plywood and making form, but also in understanding a certain amount of cabinetry and, the joining skills, which we hadn't had.
Just for listeners who maybe are a bit younger than us, can we try and paint a picture of what the British design scene was like at that time? There's a lovely quote, actually, that I found from The Independent, in 98, Noni Nieswand wrote, when you were doing Soho Brewing Company, in fact, where Edgy quotes you, and she says, "I can't stand Lloyd's in London or the Pompidou Centre, both by Richard Rogers."
Complete and utter misquote, which also got us into real trouble. No, it's a complete nonsense. I don't know where that happened, because I actually love both. Absolutely love both. I don't
so there's no sense you were breaking a mould or in some way rebelling against
absolutely not. To this day, we don't understand how that happened. But we did get we actually had a phone call from Rogers' press office saying
that's hilarious that that's come up. That's actually no, it wasn't so much at that point. It was like the Wild West. In the early 90s there was that dreadful recession in 92, and really the design world was split between consultancies, which were numerous, and well established industrial design companies, the architecture companies, and then there were these bunch of graduates, ourselves included, who weren't really looking particularly for work, but were just trying something out. So, we were, AJ and Russell, as they were, David Adjay and his business partner were down the road from us. We worked with them on a couple of things. They helped us on a couple of things. There were, lots of our contemporaries scattered around, all of us just trying to figure out how to put one foot in front of the other and make something of ourselves without looking for jobs. And that was kind of felt like the norm at the time. So in a way it was subversive because we weren't trying to get work. We weren't trying to get hired. We felt that there was hope that we could make it on our own.
Because in some ways your rise seemed, pretty seamless. You were spotted by Tyler Brûlé, who had a new magazine called Wallpaper. At that point, you did his stand at 100% Design. You were spotted at 100%, or the Loop Table was spotted by Giulio Capellini, who asked to produce it. And then you're in with these major European manufacturers, it seems to me. Do you think that would happen now? Could it happen now?
I don't think so. I really think the timing, we were really fortunate that the timing was right. I mean, we also make, you make your own fortune. We decided to design the wallpaper stand for nothing on the basis that we could put our furniture front and center. And had we not done that, we wouldn't be doing this now. So there were a few things, that were timing related and fortuitous. Today, I don't know. I think that we're in a situation now where, completely contrasting to that period, design is absolutely all around us. You don't have to make stuff to realize it, because things can be rendered so perfectly that it looks like your product's out already. So
back in those days, the loop table, I remember we thought, right, we should get some publicity on this. And so, you'd commission a photographer, you'd get tons of transparencies made up. You'd send them out, and then after a week or two, you'd hear nothing. So you'd call up the people and say, did you get and they said, oh, no, can you send another one? And every time...
But that's like another £5.
Well, more than that. It's like 20 quid, Jay. I mean, and we're like, oh, this is really hard work. Eventually, it sort of caught on. But I don't know, today there's so much around that it's really hard to really sort of see what's good and what's not almost. It's
easier to communicate your work, but paradoxically harder to get noticed.
Well, because it's so easy, everyone's doing it all the time. And
it actually puts you off it.
Yeah.
The whole thing. I mean, we have to go to Milan, we have to go to some of the fairs, but actually we don't really look around. We never buy design magazines, really. We don't look at them. It's a toxicity associated with having overabundance of design, because it just makes you question what you're doing. And actually we've come from this love of the subject of making and crafting and actually trying to do something that makes a difference. But it is hard with so much stuff around to kind of keep that focus.
And making's always been important to what you do.
Model making for us, yeah. But also being close to the making. I mean, we're neither of us are furniture makers. And we probably knock something together, but I shouldn't think anybody would want to buy it. But we are intrinsically linked to the process and love every kind of minute of it, and are involved in it all the way through. But I think the thing that we get out of it most is working with the people who really know what they're doing, the craftsmen, whether it's actually working on an actual piece of solid wood furniture, for example, or the technology that goes into making an incredible mold for a plastic injection molding. It's still craft to us, and we love that process.
So as the number of products in your range expanded, so did the materials that you used. There was a table in oak for Iskon Plus, a stool in teak for Capellini. You did a PET bottle for Coca-Cola. I mean, would you do that now, out of interest?
Definitely not out of PET, but we might do a bottle if we could find something. Well, no, actually, we probably wouldn't. No, because not for a company that's producing things that would have to be used only once. No, we definitely wouldn't. But I think, starting out as a designer, especially in those days, you never got the opportunity to work with a big company to start with. You had to prove yourself. It took, probably 7 to 10 years, probably before the really big companies would work with you. And that meant that the smaller companies, you weren't really using very high-tech processes and materials because the investment cost is so high. So you tended to be doing pretty basic upholstery and solid wood and things like that.
But as you've gone on, you haven't only done work for production. There's been limited edition products for people like Established & Sons. You've done installations with BMW and Sony. I mean, you've done works of art at the Haunch of Venison. Was that always going to be part of your portfolio?
I think the fact is that one of the main reasons that I think Ed and I work together is because we're both ambitious to challenge different disciplines. So we haven't stuck with one thing. Maybe to our detriment that we haven't become known for the thing. We're not the guys that do the dots or the people who do the shiny stuff or whatever it is. There's not one thing. Our thing is being diverse. But we do that because I think we've both got quite low boredom thresholds, and we love to do new things and learn a lot. So each one of those things that you've just talked about brought a whole new set of skills and learning.
I think what's important to say, is that both those projects you mentioned, the Sony installation and the BMW installation, they both started as something very different from what they ended up, because we were I guess, ambitious, as Jay said, to do something really incredible. And, the Sony one, for example, was really just to design a room set for Sony to show some TVs at Milan. And they approached us to do that. And we just thought, well, we can't do this. It's not interesting at all. And so we dug really deep into what new technologies and that they were working on. And they were working really deeply in sound. I mean, lots of other things as well. We went to the headquarters in Tokyo. They opened the doors to all their new stuff, and we thought that the stuff that the sound stuff that they were working on was incredible, and we decided to base an installation around that. So we quite often turn things on their head. What comes to us or what we initially discover with a company is not necessarily where we end up.
And actually, in both those, in the case of the Sony exhibition, which centered around sound, and then the BMW installation that we did at the V&A, which was really about a visual kind of change or subversion, we're really concerned with experience and not about shapes. Or they were both of those exhibitions were like a complete break for us from designing form. They were about changing the way that you hear the world, or you feel in a space, or you see things. So in a way, that's like a holiday for us.
There's always a fascination with duos, Lennon, McCartney, Blair, Brown, Ridgely, Michael, as to how they work together.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you bring between the pair of you to this partnership?
I don't know yet, really.
I think it changes. That's the thing on every project. It's not like, you don't have the straight guy and the funny guy. You don't have the one guy who's the nuts and bolts and one with the flair and one. We work across so many different disciplines and so many different companies, materials, that inevitably one kind of takes the lead on a project and then maybe hands over the baton halfway through. And also these projects typically take years. They're not sort of, they don't take a few weeks. They might take 2 to 4 years if it's a furniture piece. So it's hard to really tell exactly who does what.
Well, I think the strength of partnerships, creative partnerships, so I'm not talking about comedy particularly because I don't think that would go down terribly well, but creative partnerships are successful, normally in architecture, because the two partners can honestly tell each other what they really think. Whereas if you're a named designer or a named architect, clearly you hire people who possibly, in the sense of like the court of Henry VIII, don't tell you really how it is. So you as the principal potentially end up feeling slightly insecure, and you just get surrounded by a lot of yes people. Whereas Ed and I don't have a yes type of relationship. We always challenge each other, but in a really healthy way. And and I think that's what. So I think when we're working on a project together, the thing that comes out at the end of it is almost always better than it would have been if it'd been one or the other of us.
Has the way that you work changed as the company has got bigger? Because you have staff now, you have a team. How big are you, in fact?
Not that big, like 13 or something, including us.
Yeah, not even, I think.
But actually, it's grown, but it hasn't really. I mean, it could be much bigger than it is, but we decided, we want to keep it kind of manageable. So maybe 10 people. It hasn't really changed, no, actually hasn't. I mean, obviously there are people who we work with who are incredibly creative people who really help the process for us. But we don't exclude them. It's all part of the kind of conversation.
Yeah. But also, we do, because we do quite diverse things, we need someone who's really good at upholstery detailing. We need someone who's really good at 3D surfacing on the computer for plastic projects. And so you build up your team with experts, and they're very much a part of the process, and we discuss at length with them. So we don't sort of hand stuff down to them and say, right, draw that up or get that made. They're integral to the process.
I think the next material I'm keen to alight on, because I'm aware that the clock is ticking, is polypropylene, which you used to create the Tipton chair for Vitra. Why that material, and what was the thinking behind that chair? I mean, it was originally intended for schools, like the Robin Day polyprop, right?
I mean, it's quite the project itself is came from a question that was posed to us by the Royal Society of Arts, because they were. Do you remember when in the good old days when there was this thing called Building Schools for the Future? And the RSA were involved with one of the academies, the Tipton Academy, in fact, which was kind of pioneering new ways of teaching kids, new curriculum, and that kind of thing. They were trying to find furniture for the project. So we were sort of challenged with this idea of going through catalogues, seeing what was available, and seeing if there was something on the market that we thought would be right for the way their kids are taught today.
It was purely, they came to us for advice and a recommendation, rather than, they didn't come to us for design.
And there wasn't anything. So we were quite astonished, really, that furniture hadn't moved at all.
In terms of why wasn't there anything? What were you looking for?
The big thing is that the way that kids learn is not the way that we were taught. You know, when we just sat down and copied stuff off the blackboard, as it was. Actually, the place of education now is much more like the workplace, where kids are taught in project teams, where they move around the studios, around the classroom. And the furniture that we were being asked to select was a combination of sort of 60s school furniture and then cafe chairs, you know, pretty good stuff, not bad, but just not appropriate. And so we suggested that this was a really good opportunity to design a new chair for a new way of learning. That was it.
So we went to quite a few schools around the country and started talking to the teachers and saying, you know, what's wrong with the furniture that you've got, or what could be an improvement. And at the same time, we were also doing a lot of research, uncovering research that had been done, and mainly in the, I think, late 60s, early 70s, about the fact that if you could incorporate some movement in a school chair, so that the kids, when they start to fidget, rather than actually tipping back on their chair or getting up or tapping their leg on the floor, they could actually use that frustration, I guess, into moving in the chair, say in a safe manner,
as opposed to rocking back, which
is kind of dangerous. What that does is that as you're using your leg muscles to tip forward and backward on your chair, you're increasing slightly the blood flow around the body, and therefore you're getting a bit more oxygen to the brain, and therefore you're becoming slightly more alert, and your concentration is improved. So we uncovered that piece of research that I think came from Scandinavia, and then alongside that, any good contemporary office chair has a forward tilt, because it's much, much better for you if you're sitting for periods of time to have your spine straight and your legs tipping forward. So we put together a brief, really, and that incorporated movement, a forward tilt, low noise, because all the teachers said that when the kids move the chairs around, they're so noisy. They had to have colour, because most schools have colour coordinated areas or floors in their building, and it had to be indestructible. So no moving parts and really no components, because in the end, either they get pulled apart by the kids or they just fall apart. So that was our brief, and we took that to the RSA, and they thought it was fascinating, but they didn't really know how do we take it from here. So we approached Vitra, because we thought Vitra being the perfect partner for this kind of project, because they've got so much knowledge in the workplace. They also they can deal with large numbers, and they've got a very high level of production.
Was it always going to be polypropylene?
No, it wasn't always going to be polypropylene. But we knew we had to create a chair that had movement but without mechanism. And as Ed was saying, it had to be something that had a really long life cycle. So we figured it probably should be a monoblock, and that led us to plastics. It led us to plastics because we thought a one-shot injection molded chair would be incredibly strong. Now maybe perhaps we would use a different polymer, a recycled polymer or a non-downgradable polymer. But then it was a really good solution to the project, because I think typically the school chairs in the UK have an 18-month life cycle. They cost next to nothing, but they break.
I think
really
it's about
rapidly.
11 quid was the average spend on a British school chair.
And we just saw so many chairs in skips. We thought, right, we've got to design something that's going to last a really long time.
But presumably if it's being manufactured by Vitra, it's quite an expensive piece? I mean, has it gone
It
into
is.
schools?
You see, the problem is that, you can buy a chair for £11 or whatever it is, which will last you, 18 months or 2 years if it's quite well looked after. This is what they told us in the schools. Or you can spend maybe 60 quid on a Tipton chair and it'll last you probably 25 years. But the problem is that the school budgets don't work like that. They can never gather enough money together to make that long-term investment. So they still rather spend 10 or 11 quid on a chair and just keep recycling them.
I mean, just quickly for the listeners who might not be aware, but injection molding, can we describe what that process requires?
Okay, so for example, on the Tipton chair, injection molding basically means you need a large bit of metal with the negative shape of the object removed, and then plastic is melted and under force injected into the shape. And then the parts of the mold come apart after a few minutes once it's cooled down, and then the object's sitting there. It's like making an Easter egg or anything, any type of molding. It's very, very straightforward. In the case of the Tipton chair, I think the mold, because it's a complex form, I think there are 7 moving parts, and I think it was 20 tons of steel that we had to cut to make the chair. And not only that, the chair is also gas injection molded. So that means that the plastic is injection molded, but whilst the plastic is in the mold and it's still molten, high pressure hot air is forced into the mold as well. And what that does is it pushes the plastic to the extremities of the mold and creates something like a bone structure. You know how you have that sort of aerated section in your bones. It creates a lightweight. It uses less plastic because the inside is essentially hollow. So when the mold opens, it has a perfect skin, which is finished in the way you want it to be finished. But the inside sections, if you cut the legs in half, for example, is hollow and aerated.
So it's light.
It's really, really light, and it's actually incredibly strong. But it's incredibly complicated to do that. And what was great about the Tipton project with Vitra is that they were mad enough to do it, to invest in something that they didn't know would be well received at all.
It's an odd looking chair. I mean, it looks less odd now because I think we've become familiar with it. But when it was first launched, I'm sure there are a lot of people that thought, well, do we really need a chair that does this? But I think it's sort of proved itself. I mean, the sales every year still keep growing.
Yeah.
And it's finding its way into more and more colleges. Schools in this country, sadly not, but schools in Central Europe, there are many, many schools and lots of universities. But in London, I mean, you find it in the Royal College of Art, in Central St Martin's. It's found its way into education at a higher level.
And what's the other thing that's interesting about it is that with the whole emergence of the startup, economy that's happened in the last sort of 10 years, it's displaced office furniture, office chairs. So it's it's a simple Tipton chair gives you enough comfort for a day's work, and you don't need all the kind of bells and whistles that you were normally sold for an office chair.
And that notion, that the research that you did and the ability to tip forward on the chair, I mean, that fed into a very different project, which is the Bodleian Library, University of Oxford, that happened a couple of years later. Yeah,
that was a competition that the library, Oxford University Library, set to design the third chair in 300 years or something, wasn't it? Something like that. Yeah. So they've obviously got a good track record of furniture that lasts. We applied our learning from the Tipton chair to the library chair. Very different, obviously, incredibly different, because Bodleian Library is they expect their readers to work in the chair for up to 12 hours, and anyone sitting, because people fly over from all over the world to look at these manuscripts, medieval manuscripts, for example. So they needed extreme comfort, but a chair that would obviously sit well in the Bodleian Library.
Yeah, so it's a very different version of the Tipton chair. So you have an upholstered leather seat in an oak frame, but it still does the same thing.
So by this stage, you're on a bit of a run, really, because your next project, the one we're going to talk about next, was the Olympic Torch 2012 Games. You won an international competition, but you didn't really have long to design this object.
Well, yeah.
There's a story there, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, the LOCOG, which was the London Organising Committee, had planned the route for the torch and everything that around the torch relay but had not appreciated, I think, how long it takes to design and engineer and then build torches. And we were left with 18 months.
Yeah, it's normally 3 years.
It's normally 3 years, and it was 18 months before the start of the games to come up with an idea, have it engineered. Bear in mind, this isn't just a nice-looking object. It's a very functional thing. You know, it
has to be comfortable in your hand, I guess.
Well, it has to be lightweight because you have runners that are, you know, in young kids, and you have elderly people. It has to be incredibly safe because you've got a gas burner in the middle of it.
And presumably it'd be bad if the flame goes out.
Well, you don't want the flame to go out, but you also don't want it to explode in a crowd on live TV either.
You don't want to set fire to the relay team in their shell suits.
So it's actually a pretty complex project, and you have to do a huge amount of testing and engineering to get to this point where you then produce a number of the torches, which is neither mass production nor batch production, because in the end we produced, I think it was 12,000 torches. There were 8,000 for the 8,000 for the relay, and then 3,000 for the Paralympic relay. Right. So the investment cost is very high to make these things, but actually the numbers are very low. So all in all, it was a very complex project under a huge amount of pressure. And in fact, it was so tight on timing that they were actually making torches as the relay was happening, and we were shipping torches to the next event.
Yeah, it was tight. There was supposed to be. There was another aspect to this as well, which we haven't really spoken about before, I don't think, and that was that when we won first of all, we won the competition. It was an international competition, and initially the IOC and LOCOG were really keen that the torch should be a green relay, and they were really keen that we explored the idea of using I think it was compressed elephant grass, wasn't it?
Elephant grass
and coconut oil.
In coconut oil. It was a sort of cake, a compacted cake of grass and coconut, which you know the flame was great. It gave a really good flame. It was impossible to light,
and it was impossible to put it out.
And it also
cinders were flying
off.
It was like a steam train. So when you're actually running down the street, there was a high probability that you would set fire to people. So we were running. We were a year and a half. You know, we were a year and a half late, even when we won the project. Then actually, we were developing 2 torches at the same time, putting an awful lot of effort into trying to make this thing work. In parallel, working on a kind of really complex gas burner as well. The whole thing was actually.
It was brilliant. It was totally nerve-wracking, but so brilliant. And then other obstacles would just appear. We decided to do sheet aluminium because it was very lightweight, and it was perforated with thousands of holes. In the end, 8,000 holes, because we wanted to represent each one of the runners in the body of the torch.
And each one of the miles.
But the reason that we also did it was because it made it lightweight, and it made it sort of aerodynamic as well. And it didn't transfer the heat from the flame down to the handle. So there are a number of reasons for that.
One of the reasons was that it enabled you to get enough oxygen to the bloody grass.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, the torches all had to be made in the UK. That was always stated at the beginning of the brief. And so, having got the design, we tried to find a manufacturer who could make these 8,000 or 12,000 torches in time. And just to do the relay was 8,000, and so there were 8,000 torches, 8,000 holes. That's 64 million holes.
It's a lot of holes.
It's a lot of holes to cut. And so we found this company, and they said, right, yeah, we can do this. We can do this. And then after a few small calculations, they said it's going to take about 6 years or something to make them. And we said, yeah, we've only got about 9 months now. So it ended up them buying some very fancy equipment from the States and flying it over.
The fastest laser cutter on the planet was brought in. Don't know what it's doing today.
So local didn't say maybe cut the holes out. Guys.
No, local
the holes were definitely.
No, they were no. That was the brilliant thing. LOCOG was so sold on our design that they would not compromise on anything. They had to get this thing done.
They were
as
really
we
good, weren't they?
it.
They were.
Yeah.
We were working on a daily basis of the fear that you get of public humiliation if you don't do a good job. But LOCOG were incredibly professional, really, really, really committed to it, and they just didn't see. They're like, okay, we'll do this. Let's make it work. We'll make it work.
But it was dawning on us at halfway through when we thought maybe we're not going to get there in time. This could be the last job we ever get. You know, it was sort of, we had to really push hard to get it done.
Yeah, that's good.
So during all this time, you've not just been Barber Osgerby. In 2001, you created Universal Design Studio, which specialises in architecture interiors. Well, in 2012, I guess after the Olympics, you founded MAP, which is an industrial design consultancy. I mean, you recently sold a majority stake in those to WPP. I'm wondering why.
Why we did it?
Does it mean you don't have to work again?
Does it mean we don't have to work again?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think we're doing here?
Well, I'm intrigued. So why did you decide to sell?
We decided, I mean, in fact, we started both of those companies without our name over the door because we realized how good we were at collaborating. And we felt that we wanted to create an architecture and interior side and then an industrial side, which could be free to work, to bring the great people that we had to work alongside individuals and brands to do things which belong to the brand or the company, not to me and Ed. And Barber Osgerby was always our kind of authored side, so we didn't really feel that we had to have that kind of ownership over them. And then we decided to do the kind of partnership with, in fact, AKQA, who is one of the digital companies that are owned by WPP. We decided to do that kind of partnership because we realized, as they did, I think, that the worlds had changed. The worlds of architecture and interiors experience and industrial design have changed so radically. We needed a digital aspect to it, you know, to actually be able to be relevant in today's world. We needed that. And we couldn't generate it ourselves. And we already had a really good friendship with Ajaz Ahmed, who started AKQA, and it felt to us to be the perfect way of us bringing digital and into our world. And for them, it meant a digital agency could then be offering architecture and industrial design. So in a way, it becomes a sort of seamless consultancy, which takes care of all aspects of life, from the built environment to the handheld, and then everything in between in the digital sphere. So it just felt like the next thing to do for us, the next step.
I mean, has it changed the way that you work on a day-to-day basis, or has it?
You mean us, the two of us?
Yeah.
Not that much, actually, because before we merged the companies, we weren't really working that much on a day-to-day basis. We obviously had an overview of both MAP and Universal, but we weren't working on projects on a daily basis. So it hasn't changed so much, honestly.
We always subscribe to the thing, which is, I can't remember who said it, but if you're going to hire someone, make sure you hire someone who's better than you. And we did that so effectively with Universal and MAP that they were already really independent companies run by brilliant people.
But that said, I mean, we are still involved. I mean, we are still involved in both those companies and still, you know, work on projects together with them.
Yeah, pretty much every day, in fact.
So, kind of looking through your clippings, you received incredibly little in the way of critical brickbats. So you haven't had that kind of, I don't know, Thomas Heatherwick Garden Bridge moment. The only one I can really think of was Rowan Moore, the Observer's architecture critic, who wrote, "I found their works to be a little Blair-ite, examples of the tendency to take the inheritance of modernism, rinse out its social aims, and turn it to shaping blandly desirable consumables." I mean, what do you make of that?
That was interesting because that interview was done just after we launched the Tipton chair.
Which it was actually about the Tipton chair.
Anyway, we were really perplexed. It was a bit of a kind of the Richard Rogers thing from earlier on, maybe. But, you know, everything that we've done, all the projects that we've done, I think we have a huge... It's not just a kind of aesthetic pursuit. It's an intellectual pursuit, and there's a great deal of discussion about what we're doing and the changes that we can see in society and what we develop to accommodate those changes. So I don't know, maybe I didn't really understand it, honestly. I think Tipton chair is, you know, if I say so myself, is one of the most important pieces of design, and certainly one of the most important chairs that's been created in 20 years, without doubt. And that didn't come just because we sketched something that was based on modernism. It was actually based on a huge amount of research and commitment from a company, Vitra. I mean, Vitra wouldn't have done it if it was a flippant thing.
I'm not sure what I can add, really. No, I mean, yeah. No, we were definitely confused at the time. But as you say, that's possibly the only or one of the only few negative comments on our work. So maybe
I quite like a bit more, actually, because I get quite
that
defensive.
is something. No, but it's true that there is little real criticism in design as opposed to architecture, which is much more hard nosed, and fashion and art. But yeah, no, I think it'd be helpful actually to have some slightly more.
People always say they want to see more criticism until they're criticised, and then they get really shirty.
No, I mean, I think the thing is that with Rowan, I think that he is an architecture critic, and generally speaking, architecture is something which is imposed on a society, even if it's just a house on a street. It's imposed on the people who live there, and I think that it's fair enough to be critical of that. I think in the majority of our work, people have the choice to have it, with some notable exceptions, like the Olympic torch, which represented the country and was imposed. Mostly, people have the choice whether or not to surround themselves with our stuff. But I do think the things which we have done, which are kind of have been imposed, so the exhibitions we've done, like In the Making at the Design Museum, the Sony show, Double Space and the Olympic Torch, have all had really deep...
And the coin
have all had really strong relevance. And haven't been Blair-ite, really.
I think in fairness to Rowan, he came in saying he had this prejudice, and the Tipton, to put it into context, the Tipton kind of changed.
Oh, really? Is that right?
I think that's the way.
I'm not sure I read the article, actually.
He's a very good writer, Rowan. He is a very good writer. Let's scroll forward to today, shall we? The final piece I thought we could talk about was the stacking chair you've done for Emeco, which is made from old Coca-Cola bottles, right? Mixed with glass fibre?
Yeah.
The on and on chair.
The on and on chair, yeah. It's a project. It's our first project with a brilliant company called Emeco, based in the west coast of America.
Who have, I mean, historically come up with the Navy chair. They've been very important.
Yeah.
They went into the US jails and subsequently Conran restaurants in the 90s.
That's right. And Philippe Stark then polished them and made them more glamorous. So Emeco have got a very, very strong environmental standpoint on all their projects. It's not just that they're suddenly realised and jumping on a bandwagon. They really have. And they've been developing furniture for the last 25 years that have that integrity. And we've actually been talking to the owner, Greg, for a number of years. We've met him at various fairs, and he'd said, I'd love to work with you guys on a project. Let's think about what it might be. And then about, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, he said, look, we're working on this new plastic. They've been working on with recycled PET for many, many years. But he said, we've got a plastic now that's not only from recycled PET, it's also endlessly recyclable. So you can effectively take 10 chairs, make 10 chairs, grind them up and make another 10 chairs from the same plastic, which is revolutionary, actually. And
so it's recyclable by Emeco in that case?
By Emeco, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they could actually collect the chairs. If something broke, or if you wanted to change the colour or something like that, you could just send them back. And it doesn't require a whole new chair to be molded. I mean, a new chair is molded, but the material itself doesn't downgrade. So it becomes something much more like aluminium, which is endlessly recyclable. Aluminium takes a shitload of energy to get it out of the ground, but once it's done, it'll last forever and can become anything from a can to a chair to a car to a plane and back again. And this plastic that they've developed, which I think took 14 years, didn't it?
It's taken a really long time, for sure.
Offer is the first thing to do the same.
So they said, we'd like you to do a chair for us in this plastic. And so we felt that because it's so critical that we're using this, that the plastic is so critical to the project, the type of plastic, we thought, why don't we design a chair that's as lightweight as possible? So we basically use as little of this plastic as we can. And we set about to design a chair that was, I suppose, loosely based on the classic Tonne number 14. I mean, it wasn't really at the beginning, but I guess it has a familiar, when you look at our chair, it has a sort of familiar bistro cafe look. Now, the thing about the bentwood chairs is that they are obviously they wear out quite quickly. You can't leave them out in the rain. They don't stack. There's a number of things about them that, I mean, they're a brilliant chair, but we thought, well, maybe we could sort of improve on that. So with our chair, obviously it stacks. It's made of plastic, so you can leave it outside. We've actually got a seat that's interchangeable so that you can put upholstery in it or a
plywood seat. See, we've come around. You see what I did there?
Yes, I like that. Yeah, that's good.
And it stacks in I can't remember the technical term now. What did you call it?
Spiral?
Well, yeah, it spirals upward, so it stacks upward. So it's got a very small footprint, so you can stack 8 chairs on the same space as you can as one chair.
Which is, if you've ever worked in a restaurant, when you're mopping the floor at the end of the night, it's pretty handy to be able to stack them like that.
But also, we called it the on and on chair because that really describes both the plastic, but also the motion of the stacking.
Can I ask, because we're coming to the end of our time, you have many, many things to do, and I appreciate the time you've given up. Thank you. But it seems to me that there's a generation of designers who've come after you who have rather different interests. The old established path of maybe working for major Italian firms is kind of not seen as an obvious route so much anymore. I'm just wondering how you think the design industry has changed since you emerged in 96.
Well, I think it's changed radically. I think, as you say, the model of working for a big manufacturer and getting paid a royalty per piece that's produced is definitely going out of fashion with most, I would say, young designers who are prepared would rather either batch produce or produce themselves. I think that's seen, and I think in a way that's probably a much more sustainable future for design anyway. I mean, if you go back 50 years, I would say all designers were working locally. So they're all working with local producers, which meant that they were using probably local materials. Things weren't being shipped all over the world. And, really that's the way it should be. And I think it will return to that. So that this sort of interlude of 60, 70 years of industrial furniture production that's truly international rather than localized is probably going to be over quite soon.
I think that's the difference. I think what we were, we joined, I think, actually fairly late to that wave of designers who increasingly became used as a marketing function rather than actually doing great design. And I think, as Ed said, it's changed dramatically. I think a lot for 2 reasons actually. Industrial objects have disappeared and been replaced by apps. Industrial designers and furniture designers have probably seen the light and actually either done one of 2 things. They've either gone into design, digital design, because they know there's a safe career there, or they've started making their own objects, their own things, crafting. Which we've seen this kind of the emergence of craft again hugely, and people are able to make a living by using Instagram and social media to sell their things without needing to use retailers as such.
So do you feel you're the last of a generation?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually think we are. I mean, we've discussed it a lot over the last few years. I think, and it's actually becoming, interestingly enough, 5-6 years ago, we were inundated with CVs, every week, people wanting to come and work with us. And now it's quite tough trying to find people because they've all moved on and they're doing different things. It's not necessarily what people want to do now.
Yeah, and courses have closed down. The courses that we all went on to from foundation aren't there anymore. Well, some of them are. Some of them are brilliant. Like Kingston's amazing, for example. But
Ravensbourne is very digital as opposed to the course that you did. That doesn't exist anymore.
Completely different. And that they started really early on. But and I guess Ravensbourne was always a communication school too. So graphics and television was a big part of what they did there. But yeah, certainly. And also, you can understand that workshops take up a huge amount of space and money. And what I loved about Ravensbourne was the workshops. That's why I went there. But it's a big capital expenditure and takes a lot of floor space. So you can understand the economics of it. But I think it's if you're a creative person, you get unhappy when you're removed from making things. And I think that's just something that is a human need in most, but it's an essential in a creative person.
Final question. Plans for the future. What can we expect this year?
This year?
Yeah.
Actually, we've got an interesting project coming out with an Italian manufacturer using a revolutionary new plastic, which is really exciting. Can't tell you too much about it, but it's a
it is a biodegradable plastic. I mean, not obviously in a very short time scale. I mean, you make furniture from it, but it's just another example of the way that people are developing sustainable plastics. And this will come out in April.
I was going to say for Milan Furniture Fair.
Yeah.
A couple of things really. We're working more on the work that we've been doing with Vitra, which is trying to develop new objects and furniture to accommodate the way that work is changing. And the work has changed just as much as, not just design world, but everyone's jobs have changed so radically. And again, a bit like the Tipton chair, the things that we take for granted don't necessarily support new ways of working. So we're sort of challenging that and looking at new objects and products to help people work in a better way.
Very good. Well, that's a lovely place to leave it. Jay, Ed, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And to learn more about Ed and Jay's work, go to barberosgerby.com. There are images from the interviews as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from. And go to my Patreon page and make a pledge. You can find that at patreon.com/material matters. You'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening.